Welcome everybody to Tadaima 2023. My name is Rob Buscher and I serve as the virtual film festival curator. I'm really excited to be here with my friend and colleague Jason Finkelman, curator of the Nikkeijin Illinois exhibit at the Spurlock Museum at University of Illinois, to talk a little bit about the exhibition that he put together. Jason, would you like to introduce yourself further?
Yes, thanks, Rob. It's really great to see you. And thank you for inviting me and this exhibition to be part of Tadaima. It's a really beautiful program, and I was so thankful for it during COVID. I learned a lot. I got to do a genealogy research project, a one on one consultation. Um, and just all the films and all the programs are just fantastic. So thank you, everybody who organized all of the events for Tadaima. My name is Jason Finkelman. My title here at the University of Illinois is Director of Global Arts Performance Initiatives. And Global Arts Performance Initiatives is a curatorial line for music. And specifically, I focus on music improvisation, avant garde jazz, um, global cross cultural projects, and things of that sort, as well as music traditions of the world. So I span music programming on campus with different institutions, including the Spurlock Museum. Um, just after COVID, as we were coming out, I had a meeting with the director of Spurlock Museum, um, Elizabeth Sutton, and we were having a lovely meeting talking about other programming that I was collaborating with Spurlock on. There was also a film series that I've presented here on campus, the Asia Lens series. So that was a series helping educators learn about multimedia research, multimedia materials to teach about Asia, was a primary focus of that series. So we had this beautiful conversation. She asked what I'd been up to, and I said, well, I've been really enjoying my genealogy work. I told her the story about how my Japanese ancestry, fourth generation, half Japanese, and my Yonsei life, and looking back into the immigrant stories of my family. And she was very fascinated. And by the end of the conversation, she turned to me and said, well, Jason, I'm from California. It took me a while to learn about the Japanese American experience. And when I did, I made a commitment that I'd always wanted to fulfill, and that was to show an exhibition on the Japanese American experience. And I believe I have found my curator. So that was quite a surprise, and I didn't take it lightly because I knew it was an incredible opportunity to express the history, but I wasn't sure exactly how I wanted to do that. So I asked her if I could come back with a proposal. And when I did, I thought that the best way to tell the historical narrative of the Japanese American experience would be through the stories of people who are part of this institution. And I theorized that I would find subjects who were here before World War II, during World War II, and after, and that through those stories we could touch upon the key historical points of that we share as Japanese Americans in the United States and in North America. So that's what launched Nikkeijin Illinois, and I'm very, very honored to have had this opportunity. The exhibition opened in February, February 19th of this year. Um, and we opened the exhibition with a conversation with Ross Harano, who is a figure um, in the exhibition, and Alice Murata. And that video is available on the Spurlock website. So we'll put a link to that as part of this program. So that was a wonderful opening, and over the course of the year, or just a little under a year, we've had special programs that have been related to the exhibition to bring more connections to the exhibition, and to bring it to the present day, and just continue to have conversations about this shared experience. So that's what Nikkeijin Illinois is about, and I'm excited to move on with this virtual tour.
Great. We look forward to seeing it.
This is the opening slide, Nikkeijin Illinois virtual tour. I'll just say that the title of the exhibition, Nikkeijin Illinois, I fretted about quite a bit. I wanted to make sure it was proper, and in the end, it's sort of not proper. But I felt that it made a lot of sense after having conversation about it. As we all know, Nikkei is a person of Japanese ancestry out in the world. Nikkeijin, Jin is person, and I suppose in Japanese the proper way would be Illinois Nikkeijin. But in consulting with my Japanese friends here, we decided, yes, I think Nikkeijin Illinois makes more sense for a show in the United States. So I like to share that story too, because we did put some thought into the order of the words. So here's the virtual tour. This is the gallery that you walk into. You see that there's 12 profiles that we exhibit on these little stations, and we have these placards that kind of separate the timeline, and each of those placards has a timeline. And the one that we're looking at, that's over to the right, that lists all the incarceration camps. So, again, we want it to be informative for new viewers, but in the end, we ended up really bringing more insight to one thing that I thought was important was the division within the Japanese American community that happens during incarceration with loyalists and disloyals, and those who wanted to serve and fight in the 442, and those who wanted to repatriate or were protesting against the treatment. So that's one theme. But another theme is really the Midwest Japanese American story, and that's more of what we'll be talking about today. So this is the opening board, and you see that it starts with a name and a map and the names of the generations: Issei, Nisei, Sansei, Yonsei, and Gosei. And we talk a little bit about the numbers. I don't think that I have to share too much about that with our community, but we wanted to be clear that you see a range of figures, and that 110,000 Japanese Americans were removed from the West Coast, from the military exclusion zone. But as we've done more research, we now know that that number of incarcerees is over 125,000. So you'll see an example of the timeline that we have that goes to 1924. And, we end this timeline with the Johnson-Reed Act. And then we go into our pioneering students here at the University of Illinois, including Toichi Demoto, who was born in Oakland, California in 1902, and he passed away in 2001. He was at the University of Illinois from 1923 to 1926. Toichi earned his BS degree in Bachelor's of Science in Floriculture, and he was very active in our community. I think he really enjoyed being a student in such a large university. This little note that you see in the bottom right is a clipping from a newspaper article that says, you might want to think about how you cheer at your homecoming game. Let me suggest you hold these placards that spell out a block I for your audiences. So these trees in the background, they're photographs from my colleague Tanya Lee, and those are from the Seattle Bonsai Museum. And these are trees that Toichi raised, and the tree on the right has a really interesting story. I think that's a sequoia that he planted, one in as a bonsai, and then the second one on the land of his garden. Those who are not familiar with the Demoto family, they were one of the principal families in California to found the Demoto Brothers Nursery, and it was the largest nursery in Oakland, California. And I just want to say Toichi Demoto was, really well regarded and an award-winning and well-respected member of the the florist and horticultural societies. Um, just to add, what brought Toichi to Illinois later is interesting. So during World War II, um, his family entered Merced Assembly Center, and that's where their daughter was born. He was married to Alice D'Amoto, and they were at Amachi in Granada, Colorado, and then from there in 1943, they ended up at Schramm's Nursery in Crystal Lake, Illinois, and he went on his own and worked with a German family. Now, Rob, I remember you did a little research on the D'Amoto family. Is there anything else you wanted to say from your perspective on D'Amoto?
Just in the sense that the Domotos were very highly respected in the Issei community of gardeners and agriculture folks working in California. They used to call the Domoto brothers nursery Domoto Daigaku, like the University of Domoto, so that people who wanted to get involved in the flower business would start by apprenticing there and then eventually branch out and open their own. Some of the Domoto family ended up in Utah, where my family was during the war years and the post-war era. The Unos are their local relatives there. And I believe they have some relatives that are still in the Chicago area under a different surname. So being a large and older family, there's a lot of interesting connections here. We explore some of those in the podcast series, Look Towards the Mountain, in an episode called Issei Pioneers of the Old West.
Yeah, I looked back at that and read through some of that transcript. Thank you for. I'm glad that I'm thankful that there was that connection with you and this exhibition. You know, one of the things that's interesting about all of these profiles for me is that they change the way that I view this campus. And there are places here and places that aren't here any longer. And I feel like I walk around campus now with an augmented reality lens, and it's really interesting. And this house in the background here that is representative of the work of Shiichi Bud Kanzo still stands on Stoughton Street. And that was the first air-conditioned and heated, the first air-conditioned home in the United States. And he raised his family in there for a number of years as a research faculty member. Shiichi Bun Kanzo, he was born in Tacoma, Washington in 1905, and he died in 1992 here in Urbana. He spent his entire career here at the University of Illinois, and he received his MS in engineering in 1929, and he went right into research assistant and became an associate professor in research in 1937 to 47. After the war, he started teaching students. He moved into teaching faculty. And one of the most beautiful things that I read in doing the research in the archives on Bud Kanzo was that he acknowledged in a letter in 1971 to a former student that the class of yours has a special place in my memories because of the wonderful spirit of the returning veterans. No class before or since has ever appeared on the campus. And that was really moving to me. It was also really interesting to look into some of his history. He was very engaged as a Japanese American in the country earlier as a student. He was part of the Student Christians Association. He was the Midwest representative, in fact, of the Japanese Students Christians Association in North America. And I found a really beautiful bound volume of all the newsletters in our archive of that association, which basically folded as the war approached. But there's some amazing articles and connections to Bud Kanzo, and he led me to some other stories that I didn't pursue. For example, we had one of the leading tennis players from Japan who was winning in the Midwest throughout, tournaments throughout the Midwest until he had to return to Japan before the war. So I mentioned that because he also, as you see in the corner of this, there's a cover of a reprint of the Pioneer JACL members in 1930, and Bud Kanzo was at that meeting. And so we used his profile as a way to introduce the Japanese American Citizens League, in which, Rob, I know you've been very active with. Maybe you could add something about that historical photo or that moment in time. But before we get to that, I just want to say that because of the war, I think that Seiichi Kanzo really just put his head down and just worked. It wasn't very public about identity and and uh, and discrimination in our community. However, there was a an organization here that he spoke at. The little book at the bottom is the people who signed in, and um, he had given a talk called "Out of Two Cultures," and I'm just really curious about that. I mean, I can't find any record of it. Um, and there was also in 1959, I just gave a talk at the University Y, and they have an International Welcome Week now. Well, in 1959, for the International Welcome Weekend, Seiichi Kanzo spoke on discrimination at that event. So I did find some record of his activism and his support of Japanese Americans and international students here on campus. But I was happy to have a conversation with his daughter at after the show was mounted, and she sent me some interesting information. Bud Kanzo is so revered in engineering that he's a member of the ASHRAE Hall of Fame, and so I'll hold up this little document here. I don't know if you could see it in the tiny screen, but um, in 2018, he was inducted to the ASHRAE Hall of Fame, which you don't get inducted to until after you pass away. And it says, for pioneering contributions to the growth of ASHRAE-related technology. And so again, he was a pioneer of air conditioning and heating for private homes. The last thing I'd like to say about him, I know I'm probably spending too much time on each profile already, but I'll try to zip through. This note in the middle was very interesting because it's dated in December 10th, I believe, 1941, and it's basically a permission slip from the University of Illinois for Kanzo to travel through the Midwest because he was doing consultation work with the government for military barracks, for heating military barracks. And he was doing this while his own family members were incarcerated at the Stockton Assembly Center and Rower. And I don't know, I have a feeling he went down to visit them, but I don't have proof of that. But his own daughter, you know, she said that they didn't know very much about the history. She didn't know about his engagement with the JACL, I don't think. Would you like to share a little bit more about this photo, Rob?
Well, just in the sense that, you know, this early years of the JACL, it started in 1929. So this was the very next year. And it was sort of fragmented in the sense that it had come together from several Japanese American citizens groups that were based in some of the larger population areas of Seattle, of Los Angeles, San Francisco. So they were still sort of finding their footing as a national organization. I think very much a regional West Coast organization at the time. But again, just to think about the timeline and that, you know, Konzo being a Nisei, he was at the university by the time that my Obachan was born, and she's a Nisei too. So there's the kind of generational gaps that we have sometimes based on when people's families immigrated and how much variation that there can be within a single sort of generational experience, like the Nisei, like the Sansei. So just thought that that's worth naming.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And on this next one, I'll just sort of also let folks know all the information that's on each of these panels, just so you get a sense of what we're sharing here at the University of Illinois at the Spurlock Museum. And I also want to acknowledge that the Spurlock, these photographs are courtesy of the Spurlock Museum of World Cultures. of the exhibition that I'm showing today. So, just to point out, with this profile of Hideo Suzaki, we indicate that each member, their generation. So, Hideo Suzaki's Nisei, we have the dates of his birth, 1919 in Reedley, California, and he passed away in 2000 in Walnut Creek, California. He was part of the University of Illinois. We indicate when they were here and what they did. He was part of the University of Illinois as a student from 1944 to 1946. So he's my first of two profiles of folks who were here during the war. And then he returned here in 48 and 50 and 52 and 53 to teach. And the photograph that you see in the back from the archives is with his class that he was teaching. He earned his MLA in landscape architecture at Harvard, and Hideo Suzaki is one of the most renowned landscape architects in the world. His he went to found Suzaki and Associates, and that's I'd like to use the word multi-dimensional a lot, multidisciplinary firm, and he was really interested in collaboration among people from different fields. So he would integrate land, buildings, and the larger environment, and he would do that collectively. But when I learned about Hideo Suzaki and the significance of his role here at the University of Illinois, I was pretty astonished. And this goes into seeing campus again. There are so many areas of our campus that Suzaki had influence on, including the Curated Center where I work, which is the picture with the pine trees down at the lower right. In the figures we have, again, his name, where he was born, and where he passed away. We have the engagement with Illinois, and then we have a World War II history as a synopsis, and then a historical narrative of the subject. And so that's what's in each board. And then the half circle on the side is the historical point that we wanted to make. And in this case, it was seeing campus. The thing that was so amazing to me was that, every day I enter the Curated Center and I walk across this plaza, and I don't think the day goes by that I don't think of Hideo Suzaki. But one of the things that I've uncovered recently since we put up this exhibition, and so the narrative actually changes a little bit, because in his World War II history, we have that he enters Poston War Relocation Center in Arizona with his parents and siblings on August 6th. And at the time, he had rejoined his family. He was studying at Berkeley. And then when he had to evacuate from California, he rejoined his family, and then they entered Poston together. He's one of 8 children, and he's a real rags to riches story. I mean, it's just incredible what he accomplished from being part of a very poor farming family, using his own words and his own notes. From this document that I found, he was interviewed by Charles Kikuchi in Chicago in the during his interim between joining the University of Illinois and leaving Poston. And there's a 264-page document that has diary entries and letters and all kinds of things. And it really talks about this time from when he left Poston to be the first group to join the Colorado sugar beet farm harvest. And, there was pressure on these first folks to leave Poston to set a good example. And he took that to heart. He was very, very conflicted about his identity and purpose during this period of time. He ended up in Denver after the sugar beet farming moment in December, and he learned the photography trade there. He was able to get a job, and then he eventually went to Chicago and continued to work in the same field while he was trying to figure out what to do next. So I'm not going to get into the long history of it, but just cutting to the most impressive part of all of this. Later, I'm going to show a panel in which we share the college Nisei story here at the University of Illinois. And I have to say that all Hideo Suzaki really wanted to do during this interim period was get back into school. And the Midwest schools, there are few that were admitting Japanese Americans during the war years. And the University of Illinois, as early as March of 1942, was in correspondence with presidents, the president from the University of Minnesota, who was asking, what are we going to do about the Japanese American students who want to come to our campuses? And our president at the time, President Willard, responded that he did not think that our board of trustees would have anything to do with admitting Japanese Americans, those of Japanese ancestry. And, you know, these letters are all very politically well written, you know, but what ended up happening is that our lawyer on our campus decided to declare, in consultation with the leadership, that we are a military exclusion zone because of our engagement with the Chanute Air Force Base. And they used that as the reasoning to push away anybody who wanted to inquire about becoming a student here. And we'll get a little bit more into detail about this because the Board of Trustees does pass a policy, I believe in March of 44, to admit Japanese Americans. And all this is laid out on this board, and we'll get to that in a minute if we don't run out of time. So let me keep going. Hideo Suzaki is really just a brilliant hero, and I encourage folks to learn about him if you're not familiar with all that he and his Suzaki and Associates did, including the master plan of this campus for 30 years. This is the point. So Hideo Suzaki received one of these letters saying that he could not attend the University of Illinois because of his Japanese American descent. And you know, it was crushing. In this document that I found online, that's this interview by Kikuchi, he was absolutely crushed by this. And to think that he ended up coming here to one of the leading landscape architecture programs, that there is an ongoing lecture series about Hideo Suzaki, and that he was rejected and completely destroyed by being rejected from the University of Illinois. He has an honorary degree from the University of Illinois, which he received in, let's see if I have it right here, in 1982, you know. So it's just fascinating to me that he had the fortitude to push forward and be so part of this institution for so long. Anything you want to add to that, Rob?
No, but just what an incredible piece of body of work, I should say, and touring the campus with you, I was really impressed by the landscape works that still exist.
Yes, there's at the Curated Art Museum, part of the art building, there's these mounds that are in the top right side of this photograph. They are here today, but even the benches that are his design are all over campus. You know, so it's just fascinating. He consulted on so many projects here, and I ended my talk the other day by saying he is absolutely one of my heroes. Incredible man. Henry Iyahara had a very short engagement here at the University of Illinois, but it was very significant because he was a track star when he went to school. He was born in 1926 in Garden Grove, California. In 2014, he passed away in Garden Grove, California. He was here for 3 semesters, as far as I could tell, from 1944 to 1945. The thing about Henry Iyahara that's so pronounced is that he was an exception to the regulations that the Board of Trustees created to admit Japanese American students. And it's just incredible. He and his mother and older siblings entered Poston, and his father had been held at Santa Fe Detention Facility, administered by the INS. One of his brothers enlisted in the Army, and he left Poston. Henry left Poston with indefinite leave for employment in Winnetka, Illinois in 1943, and his father reunited with the family members in Poston in 1944. So he went to New Trier High School, and this is a WRA photograph, I believe, in the center. That so it's just interesting also to consider how this journey was documented by the government, but his grades were just quite not high enough, and he had 3 letters of support in the Board of Trustees official record when they bring this up, and that's what led to his story for me. They say that he was a track star, but not only that, he was just a really amazing. His character was really amazing, and that he was very successful, and like everybody at his high school enjoyed his company. And there, in the Board of Trustees record, they print up 1 letter, but in the display on the College Nisei display, we show all 3 of the support letters, and the highlighted part of this one talks about how his brother was in the Army and had come to visit him one day, and that really broke me up the day that I saw that. I'm going to jump forward with him, but I just want to say that the historical note for him was about the National Japanese American Student Relocation Council, which plays a big role in getting college students into universities across the country. And they were working with the War Relocation Authority as well. So I'm very thankful to have learned about Henry Iyahara, and I'm sure that when word got back to the camp, to the internment camps, in the newspaper saying that he had won the NCAA championship, it's just incredible. It's just really, really remarkable that he, in 1945, he placed first in the broad jump, and Illinois wins the Big Ten Western Conference. And in 1945, he placed first in broad jump in the NCAA championship. So, word back home was we have a young man out there doing great things and jumping in freedom from where we are now, right, Rob?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right. So I wanted to be sure that I covered I've always had a deep respect for those who fought and served in World War II, and I wanted to be sure to include somebody who was a veteran. And I came across David Katagiri's story, and he was born in 1925 in Kent, Washington, and he died in La Jolla, California in 2015. And I don't really know much about him. I saw that there was a film that was being made, but that film never got completed. And I was a bit fascinated by his story. He was here from 1948 to 1951, and he gets his degree in mechanical engineering after serving. And, I think about, I haven't found a direct connection between him and Seiichi Konzo, but you have to imagine that they would have communicated and had become known to each other in a significant way. Konzo was eventually running the program. He was the director of the program. So the 442 is what I feature in this, the 100th Battalion and the 442 in this display. And Katagiri is part of the Purple Heart. He was a Purple Heart veteran of the 442nd, and he entered UIUC on the GI Bill in February 1948 and received a mechanical engineering degree. But his family was incarcerated at Tule Lake, and he signed he filled out a draft registration card before departing to work on a chicken farm in Arlington Heights. So so far I've mentioned only 2 of sort of the jobs that people were getting in the Chicago area. So chicken farming was one, and growing fowl, working for nurseries was another. Um, so he was quickly drafted um, and stationed in Europe, and he experienced combat duty in Italy and was wounded in April of 1945. And then he would continue the rest of his service um, processing German prisoners of war. So that was also interesting. One of the side stories that I don't include here, I don't think, is what was really fascinating to me. They talk about as a boy he brought uh, into the incarceration camp a model airplane engine, and so he constructed a model airplane and he flew that while incarcerated. And I just think about the imagery of flying an airplane, a model airplane, while you're behind barbed wire. So anyway, thank you, David Katagiri, for your service, and I'm thankful to have you in the exhibition. Lillian Kimura, wow. When I learned about her, I knew I had to have her profile in the exhibition. And Rob, maybe you could even share more about her term as the first woman to be the president of the National JACL. She was here from 1947 to 51, and then all the way through 54. And she received her Master of Social Work in 54 and began a long career with the YWCA. One of the things that I also wanted to include, there were so many different angles to include with her story, but I decided to focus on the Commission of Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians because she testified in Chicago. And she says that, you know, she states clearly the evacuation and detention of 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry were motivated for racist reasons. Clearly, the violation of human and civil liberties must not happen again. The YWCA supports the efforts being made by Japanese Americans for redress. We urge the Commission to recommend appropriate remedies to prevent the recurrence of such events. So, you know, she had a wonderful collegiate experience. She was involved with sports here. She was a leader, and she also resided in Westco House, which is another one of those places that does not exist anymore, except in my augmented reality lens. So, anyway, Rob, do you want to say anything else about Lillian Kimura and her role in the JACL, or any other facts about her?
Yeah, sure. I'll just mention, as you also stated, Lillian was our first woman president of the JCL National, which didn't actually happen until 1992, and it was a tremendous accomplishment. I think as progressive as the JCL did become in the post-war era, there were certain social conservative aspects within the community, within the organization, and it took a long time to have these kinds of gender equality movements happening within our own membership. Lillian was a family friend of ours. Mayo knew her through her days of lobbying during the redress movement. And then actually growing up in the Fairfield County, Connecticut, JCL New York was our closest chapter. And so I got to know her as a young kid when we would go to the JCL events, and later reconnected with her as an adult. But in her time as the national president of the JCL, it was in the immediate aftermath of the redress. And so the JCL, and I think Japanese American activists in general, were trying to understand, what do we do now? What is our role now that the redress has been achieved? And so under her presidency, there was a big focus on how do we continue to tell these stories? How do we educate the public? How do we build curriculum for K through 12 schools throughout the country? How do we continue to fund projects that will assist in telling these stories to newer generations who don't have that direct connection? And I'll just mention also that one of the things that happened under her presidency at the 1994 National Convention in Salt Lake City, when she was outgoing as the president, is when the JCL membership voted to support queer marriage equality, becoming the very first ethnic civil rights organization to do so. And so, this is a full 20 years before the Defense of Marriage Act, and it was a tremendous progressive step to take, and it was done under her leadership.
Incredible, incredible histories, Rob. I'm honored to have been able to understand that Lillian Kimura was part of this community, and she again was here from 1947 to 54. Her family reported to Manzanar Assembly Center before it was redesignated as a relocation center in June of 42. She was 13 years old and spent 3 years incarcerated at Manzanar along with her parents and younger sister before they departed for Chicago in August of 1945. She was born in 1929 in Glendale, California, and she passed away in Albany, New York in 2020. Thank you for sharing that, Rob. Ken Gunji. The Gunji family here at the University of Illinois is one of the most remarkable families and beloved families here. Ken Gunji's designation on our board is Nisei Kibe. So he spent time in Japan and, in fact, was in Japan during the war years. So this was really important for me to include him in the exhibition, and I was very, very honored that the family gave me permission to include him. He was born in 1934 in Los Angeles and passed away in 2017 in Champaign. And he was part of the University of Illinois, 1955 to 59, where he earned his Bachelor's of Science, I guess, in management. Um, and then he was a consultant from 1962 for the housing division, and then he moved on to the Illini Union. And in 1969, he received his master's in recreation and parks management. The Gunji family is his wife, Kumiko, was the director of the Japan House here, and his daughter is the current director of Japan House. What I did not know is that he spent his war years in Japan, and when he returned to the United States, he committed his life to a life of service. One interesting thing is that he was the first Japanese American Eagle Scout in Chicago. So he was very engaged with organizations from a young age, um, and he was in the National Guard for 25 years, and also worked at Parkland College after he earned his degree in 1969. So he was very, very engaged in our community, in these different organizations. But he was in Tokyo. Let's see. I'm sorry. He see. I have this information here. In 1941, his parents took him from California to Japan to for him to meet family and for them to introduce him to family. And stranded during wartime Japan, he was prohibited from speaking English while receiving an ultra nationalistic education in Japan. And he, in fact, traveled south in late August in 1945 and witnessed the aftermath of Hiroshima's destruction. And then they returned to the United States in 1949 with the assistance of an established family in Chicago. So that brought him back to Chicago. His parents were working at the time for the Diamond Trading Company, and their sponsor to bring them back in 1949 was Fred Tagordi of the Tagordi family. So very interesting histories there, and I was just delighted to learn so much about Ken Gunji and the Gunji family. Would you like to make any comment about being Kibe? Should I say anything about that? Just simply, it's those who were born in the U.S. of the Nisei generation and were sent to Japan for education. My grandfather was Kibe. He returned to Japan as a toddler and didn't return to the U.S. until he was an adult. So that's the
Yeah,
definition of Kibe.
that was also the story for my Hibachan, my great grandmother. She was born in Hilo, Hawaii, returned to Japan age 4, and then came to California age 19. It's rare for Kibe to have spent the war years in Japan. And I would say just in terms of how difficult of an experience that would have been. I can't really imagine what that would have been like. The only other comparable experience might be being someone who was forced to renounce their citizenship and essentially repatriated in the post-war era, and had to sort of endure that hostility and suspicion then from the Japanese in Japan. I can imagine, even someone like Ken Gunji being younger during the war years probably was still viewed with suspicion and some hostility, knowing that he was an American citizen.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There are stories to that effect as well. I do want to give a shout out to Michael Arjin. I think you're familiar with this book, Rob. Citizens, Immigrants, and the Stateless, a Japanese American Diaspora in the Pacific. This gave me a lot of information, and I was really appreciative of this. You also talked a little bit about, forwarding the education. I think that the volumes that are coming out now are more nuanced and exploring areas of the Japanese American experience that have been less told. This book also was really interesting to me, by A. Carly Buxton, Unthinking Collaboration, American Nisei in Trans-War Japan. And I think even in the last documentary series on Asian Americans for PBS, there's a whole section that talks about the energy around the educated Nisei who couldn't get jobs in the United States. And that was one reason why some looked at Japan as an opportunity before the war to get professional jobs that they were banned from on the West Coast, right? So that I was really appreciative of reading through these books because it gave me more insight about my own grandfather and some of the sort of the attitudes in which he has. And I have another book that I'll share that as we continue in this conversation. I don't know how we're doing on time, Rob. I hope you've been keeping track. So I'll just try to blaze through some of these. We have Momoko Iko, who is by far one of the most fascinating people that I researched here. I wish I had had the chance to meet her in person. I think I would have gotten along really well with her. She's a pioneering writer in the Asian American community. She was born in Wapato, Washington in 1940 and died in Los Angeles in 2020. It was really great being in touch with her family members in organizing this panel. I want to give a shout out to Alice Murata, who introduced me to the family members because Alice and Momoko knew each other as young people. And Momoko Iko is pictured in a Halloween costume, I think, in Alice Murata's book on the Chicago Japanese Americans. Momoko Iko was here from 1958 to 61, and she earned her BA, Bachelor of Arts in English, with honors. And she was 2 when her family was incarcerated at Portland Assembly Center, and then she was transferred to Hart Mountain. And her 3 elder siblings left for work in Chicago, military service, and a nursing program. And the remaining Ikos departed Hart Mountain for Philadelphia in July 1945, working as migrant farm labor in New Jersey before settling in Chicago, where their eldest son had relocated. So just a historical note about her career. Her most noted work is Gold Watch, a play first. Her play first received top prize for an East-West Players Writing Contest in 1970, and then was produced in LA in 1972. She was anthologized in IE. I know that that's a book that many of us have looked at, that came out in 1974. And The Gold Watch, which depicts the Issei-Nisei intergenerational conflict and the hardships of immigrant farm life. Its success culminated with a PBS broadcast premiere and programming in the 1977. There was an international television festival, so it was the first. She was the first Asian American to have a syndicated broadcast of her work, of her creative work as a play. She was influenced by. I should say that she was influenced by Lorraine Hansberry's A Raisin in the Sun. And when she saw that play, it was the first time that she saw herself in work. She had not seen people of color in the same way before. And so the Black Arts movement was really part of her spirit and education, and her work reflects it. There is work that I tracked down that that would be hard to teach today because of the language in it, but it gives a snapshot of what was going on here. Now, I was going to say, Rob, you wanted to talk a little bit about the Japanese Americans in Chicago, and I just want to read what's on this little blue pro highlight, historical highlight, I think is what we called them. So this historical note reads: Japanese Americans in Chicago. With relatively less anti-Asian sediment, Chicago replaced the West Coast as the center of Japanese American life during the war. The new arrivals' Japanese ancestry was less important than the fact that they were non-white, and they were forced into buffer zones between white and black Chicago. The search for established support networks led to the creation of two Nikkei enclaves, one in the south side between the Oakland and Kenwood neighborhoods, and the other on the near north side around Division and Clark Streets. And that's sort of close to where the baseball stadium is now, Wrigley Field. In 1940, this is a fact that blew my mind. In 1940, there were only 390 Americans of Japanese descent that called Chicago home. And by the war's end, there was nearly 20,000 Japanese Americans who had resettled in the Chicagoland area from the incarceration camps. And when the military gave up control of the West Coast in 1946, many of these families returned to the West Coast, but still 15,000 citizens remained. And that's why we see so many Japanese Americans here at the University of Illinois in these post-war years, which these last figures have included. And I'll just jump to Ross Harano, one of the most jovial people that I've ever met. He's just brilliant. I love him to pieces. He's so great. He was born in 1942. Again, he spoke at the opening. He was actually born while his Nisei parents were incarcerated at Fresno Assembly Center. They were then transferred to Jerome, Arkansas, and he had 7 uncles who served in World War II, 4 in the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and 3 served in the Military Intelligence Service in abroad. Ross Harano, as you see, he's pictured here with the mayor of Chicago. He was part of he served as the president of the Illinois Ethnic Coalition and the Chicago chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League, but he also chaired the Asian American Advisory Committee established by Mayor Harold Washington in the 1980s. He has an illustrious career in business, including serving as the president of the World Trade Center of Chicago. Ross Harano was really, really an amazing. He's just amazing. He's really wonderful to speak with, and I hope that those who are interested will take a look at our opening event in conversation with Ross and Alice Murata. Here is the person who is the most well-known photograph from Illinois, who was part of Illinois for a long time, of the Japanese American incarceration experience, Yuki Llewellyn. And she was born in 1939 in Los Angeles and passed away in Columbia, Missouri in 2020. She was part of the University of Illinois from 1967 until 2002. And she started here in the University Office of Public Information, and then she ended here as the Assistant Dean of Students and Director of Registered Student Organizations. And she served in many different ways on this community when they were establishing the Asian American Cultural Center and the Asian American Studies program. She was part of that. But for a long time, she kept the fact that she was this little girl in this most famous picture eating an apple. And I've seen 2 different kind of looks of this photo, but her World War II history is, she was married in Los Angeles. I mean, she She was with her mother in Los Angeles, and she was 3 years old when they uh, reported to Manzanar in 42. And the transitional moment was forever captured in this iconic photograph by Clem Albers of Yuki sitting on her luggage eating an apple. She was raised by her single mother, and although she had believed her father had died during the war, she discovered that her father was incarcerated at Manzanar during the same time. And she ended up in Cleveland, Ohio with her mother in October 2nd, 1945. And they had a boarding house. Her mother ran a boarding house. And so she was around college students, Japanese American college students in Cleveland. So there's a whole story there as well about a Midwest resettlement in Cleveland, Ohio. Yuki Llewellyn got her degree in, I think it was at Tulane in New Orleans, and then ended up moving here with her husband, and then raised her son here in Champaign, Urbana. So anything to add about Yuki Llewellyn?
No, just that, again, this is one of the most iconic photographs taken by the WRA photography section. So
Yeah.
it's great to kind of put some more context behind it and the individual whose life was shaped by this experience.
And I put a note on this on her profile. There's a photograph that by Paul Kitagaki Jr. that shows Yuki Llewellyn in a pilgrimage to Manzanar, and that was a project that changed Paul Kitagaki's Jr.'s photographic mission, and he went to look at photographs like this and make portraits of those who are still with us. And so he's got a wonderful book. I encourage people to look at his book. But I gave a shout out to Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages on this blue panel here. I wrote, many Japanese Americans incarcerated during World War II and their descendants returned to the sites of confinement that transformed their lives. At the age of 66, Yuki Llewellyn returned to Manzanar for the first time as part of the 2005 pilgrimage, where Paul Kitagaki Jr. took her portrait. And founded in 2016, Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages was established to document pilgrimage stories, share experience of World War II incarceration, and offer insight on intergenerational trauma. So, I give some more history. I won't read it all the way through, but I acknowledge the first pilgrimage to Manzanar in 1969, where 150 people showed up. And also the pilgrimage to Tule Lake the same year, and that annual pilgrimages happen throughout the year. So thank you, everybody here at the Japanese American Memorial Pilgrimages. I appreciate your work. Ray Sasaki is the 11th profile, and he was my first that I made the template of how we will do these panels. Ray Sasaki was born in 1948. He was a professor of trumpet here at the University of Illinois from 1975 to 2001. He was best friends with Morgan Powell. Morgan helped present some of this information. This CD was supposed to, I had hoped it would be displayed open, but somehow that didn't happen. But there's a composition in the CD that is that was dedicated to Ray and his family that Morgan Powell composed. I don't know if I have that in my notes here, the name of the piece, but it's been really amazing to talk with Ray, and there's some similarities in our family's journeys. His father enlisted into World War II military service before Executive Order 9066. I kind of think that he may have been part of the military intelligence service. Ray doesn't know much about his father's history. Ray was born in 48 after the war in Fresno, California. It's interesting because he's only like an hour away from where Hideo Sasaki's family was born and raised. And I'm still trying to figure out if there's a family connection between the two. But his paternal grandparents were incarcerated at Fresno Assembly Center, Jerome, and Tule Lake, and repatriated to Japan in 1945 in December. And his mother was incarcerated with her parents at Fresno Assembly Center, Jerome and Rower, in which they departed and returned to Fresno in 1945. So similar to my family, but there was a change because my grandfather wanted to repatriate, and my great aunt also wanted to repatriate, and my great aunt's family did, and my grandmother put her foot down and said to her husband, I am not going. I was born and raised in America. I'm from Venice, California, and I'm not going to Japan. So you could go if you want, but if we're going to raise this family together, we need to make a different decision. I'll talk about that later. But this was the first panel that I put up the questionnaire with the legendary questions that determined no boys. And the fact that Rei Sazaki's grandparents did repatriate, and then his father worked on bringing them back to California after the war, this was another part of the history. And one of the things that I hope people walk away from the exhibition with is knowing that there was this divide in the Japanese American community. And at this point, I just want to give a shout out to Takako Day, who is an independent scholar who wrote Show Me the Way to Go Home, The Moral Dilemma of Kibe No Boys in World War II Incarceration Camps. And I had a conversation with her, and she mentioned to me, Jason, you have to understand that everyone who was in Chicago were loyalists, and they were able to leave the incarceration experience early, whereas the Kibe had a whole different kind of personality and attitude about the experiences that they were going through. And so I really took that to heart, and I do hope that this exhibition conveys that divide that happened, and a rift that you and I have talked about that has gone on through generations, even throughout the JACL's politics. So we could talk about that in a second, but let me just conclude with my story, which then brings in the East Coast experience. And my grandparents left Tule Lake in February of 1946, right? So they left very late in the incarceration experience, and they were sent from Jerome, Arkansas, to Tule Lake because my grandfather wanted to repatriate, and my mother was born at Tule Lake, and what we have in the top left is her birth announcement, and that was a really great document for me to find because it also authenticates where their apartment was or their barrack number. While they were incarcerated. The background photograph, I think, as I've determined that is from Jerome, and I think this is their departure photograph. And then the photograph in the top right is Seabrook Farms, where they ended up, where there were 2,500 Japanese Americans at the largest population. I believe that's the note here. Yes, folks would come for a 6-month work contract, and more than 2,500 individuals resettled there in between 1944 and 1946, and my grandparents were part of that migration. And the photograph in the snow is the barracks that they ended up being first placed back into at Seabrook Farms, which my grandmother shared a story with me once that when they arrived at Seabrook, it was the hardest day of her life. I mean, not only was she leaving her West Coast family behind and now in New Jersey, but now she was placed back into barracks after being promised furnished apartments and all of this. So it's a really, really heavy story, the Japanese American experience story. And but I am so thankful of the fortitude and of our ancestors, Rob. I mean, it's just really incredible what they all went through. So this is where I wanted to stop telling the stories of the profiles and just quickly just jump through a couple slides. This is a look at some of the artifacts. These dressers are from my family, and a cane that is in this picture. You can't see it in this picture, but it's in there. There is a front image of this dresser. There are these items from Tule Lake. We're still trying to get the provenance of the placard, but all signs indicate that was created at Thule, but also the burl wood art. We always understood that that came from Thule. And then there's this post-war origami umbrellas that Rob and I talked about a bit. That this was a craft that was practiced while by some incarcerees, and there was a woman who was part of the Seabrook community who made these for my family. I remember as a small kid having my mother ask all of her friends who smoked to collect these cigarette wrappers. This is a T-shirt from the 50th anniversary of the Year of Remembrance that it was given to me by a friend. This is one of the other icons that is not from my family, but from the Rosarano's family, and it's an incredible letterbox that was honoring the sons who were in service, and this was created while they were incarcerated. Here is the panels for. There's a digital station for people to add their stories, so I wanted to give a platform for other people who were so inspired to share their voices. If anybody who views this as part of the University of Illinois in any kind of way, as a student, as somebody who's spoken here, who whatever, if you want to add your story, please visit the Spurlock website and see how to do that. So I also wanted to honor the campus units that do the work here, and Japan House is honored in the calligraphy and in the photographs, but then there's the AAC, the Asian American Cultural Center groundbreaking is in that photograph there. But here's the College Nisei story at Illinois, and it's very, very profound. This first board, going from left to right, you have 1942. The conversation is starting in March. And in April 42, they've come up with this policy that we are a military exclusion zone because of our military work with Chanute Air Force Base. That's about, I don't know, a half hour or 45 minutes away from here. In May, I have to put on my glasses, I think. In May of 42, and I do have these somewhere. In May of 42, there's all these letters in 42 and 43 coming from organizations like the Japanese American Student Relocation Council and inquiries from other organizations. And so that's what the next column is dealing with. But in February of 1944, and jumping ahead to March of 1944, in March of 44, the Board of Trustees comes up with the policy to admit Japanese Americans. And in the policy that's public record in the Board of Trustees minutes says, our registrar has been looking into the matter and recommends the following. I wanted to see what the registrar researched, and I wanted to know, like, what did he report to the president? And when the day I found those documents, I found out that they were disclosed in February of 1944. And the registrar says in part of this letter, I think this is a particularly bad time to change our present policy, which has been to discourage the admission of Japanese students. I'm thankful that that was not the case, that they didn't take that recommendation from the outside forces must have had more pressure and more reason. But below that is the synopsis of, I believe, 14 institutions in the Midwest. Of only half of them are agreeing to admit Japanese American students. And for half of those, probably, they haven't started admitting them yet. So this policy that's formed at the University of Illinois in March of 44 is really only focused for students coming in the fall of 44. Maybe there are students who came in the summer. But the next column in September 44, you see the Henry Iehara letters of support from 3 other members. He was very lucky that he had somebody who was connected to the Board of Trustees. And it's the handwritten notes of what they put in the public record. So that's also in the Board of Trustees minutes. And then the last panel is just how do we, in May of 1945, they were revisiting the policies of hiring Japanese American students on campus to work, because that was something that you weren't able to do. How did you make a career and be self-supportive as a student working and going to school? So that's what the College Nisei thing. This is part of the exhibition. I want to thank Rob Buscher and and his family for providing uh, these incredible documents of anti-Asian hate from the war period and beyond. I know that you've spoken extensively about this work, and there's lots to find online about these propaganda materials and why it's important to include them in this conversation. And then also American Peril. So I was able to showcase 12 profiles, and Rob Buscher and Justin Chiu, is that how I pronounce his last
Chiu.
name? Is
Hmm.
is collaborated in taking these items of hate and profiling Japanese and Asian Americans and Muslim Americans as a response in 2017 to anti-Muslim policies that were coming in from the administration at the time. And I was able to select 12 profiles out of 20 and profile them in our exhibition, bringing our exhibition to the present. And I want to thank you, Rob, for inviting me to be part of this. I'm pretty sure we're close or over time. So if folks are in the University of Illinois area in Urbana, Champaign, please visit the Spurlock Museum. The exhibition is up through December 10th, and we are working on one last engagement program, a performance piece, monologue performance that also talks about the Chicago Nisei experience.
I'd like to thank you again, Jason, for being a part of the Tadaima 2023 virtual pilgrimage. We really appreciate you sharing the specific stories about the Japanese American resettlement in the University of Illinois area, as well as the pre-war and post-war stories. It's such an important moment, I think, to be able to think about holistically, how do we continue to tell these stories? And I think site-based historical exhibits like the one that you curated here can help us to tell the story in new ways and make it more relatable to local audiences throughout the country who might not have been able to connect to the story of the forced removal on the West Coast or the camps themselves, but understanding how these individuals became members of their own local communities, I think is a way that we can continue to build empathy in current generations across our society. So thank you for doing this work at the University of Illinois. And I strongly encourage people to check out the links that we'll be posting in the description of this video to the opening talk with Ras Hirano, and any other links that you would like to share will also be included there.
Rob, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be part of Tadaima. It's really a tremendous program that all of you are organizing, and it's been really humbling to embody in some way, to have these stories in my being, and I hope that it inspires folks to continue the conversation. That's really what I really would like the Spurlock space to continue to be, is a place where not only Japanese American stories are shared, but these immigrant stories that have adjacent types of trauma and histories, and so that we could have these conversations for better understanding and healing.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again for being a part of this, and thank you to all our viewers. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your 2023 Tadaima virtual pilgrimage.